at St. Joan of Arc Parish, which is my parish, by the way, in Arvada, Colorado. I was sitting and I was looking around at them, and I love these gals. But I said, you know, for a single man of my age, I sure have a lot of women telling me what to do and where to go. But thanks be to God for them. And I want to tell you, I don't know if you've ever seen this. Two of my great patrons are St. Therese of Lisieux and St. Joan of Arc. I don't know if you know, when she was in the convent, St. Therese, the little flower, wrote a play about St. Joan of Arc. In that play, just for the sisters, she played St. Joan of Arc. This is a picture of St. Therese dressed as St. Joan of Arc. A fellow in California gave this to me as a gift, and so ever since I bring her with me to have her watching over me when I do these presentations. I like it so much. I mean, if I can't trust Jill, who can I trust? I figured to start off, one of the things, I start this almost everywhere I go by telling people that God loves the ordinary, so do I, and so should you. It really is the key to everything. I've thought at times that it would be easier to teach people nuclear physics and Greek, something very complicated, than actually teach people something very simple and get them to take it to heart. So I thought about that, but I figured, you know, I would have to learn nuclear physics and Greek first, so I don't want to do that. I've been trained on the other stuff. My whole point is to acknowledge God, take the next right step, and be a sign of hope. That's the simple way that's going to carry us through all the troubles here, and that will keep you safe no matter what happens. So I'll talk about that. But I also know, how many of you have read the website or seen the video, the Birmingham video? Okay, that's a good chunk of you. Those of you who have, you know that there is a prophetic element to it. I'll be real frank, I like to downplay that. Yes, I get messages, most of them are for me. A few of them are for you, but primarily it's because I've had them ever since I was a kid. I had an angel that came and worked with me from the time I was a kid. He's like a big brother to me. I didn't know until I was 8 years old that not everybody had this going on. And what he was doing was he was telling me that in my lifetime, a great trial would come upon the world, the greatest crisis in the history of the world. And that if I would accept it, God had work for me. But it would require a lifetime of training because we do tend to think the way from an earthly perspective, and I needed to learn to see a little bit from God's perspective on things. I agreed to go along with the training. I frankly, for a lot of the time, I didn't believe some of it. I thought when he was telling me, you know, that a time was coming when good would be counted as evil, when evil would be counted as good, when we'd be persecuted. I just didn't think that even if the world could change that dramatically, it wouldn't change that dramatically in my lifetime. I didn't believe that. But I figured, with what I was shown with the crisis, if it was true, then heaven knew the world was going to need somebody to reassure them, because what he was also telling me was this was to bring us back. This was not God destroying the world. In fact, it had nothing to do with God doing anything at all except removing his restraining hand. We were going to bring it on ourselves by our rebellion, by our thinking that we were sufficient to ourselves and we didn't need God anymore. So he was going to let us suffer the consequences of what we had done. But it was not the end, even though it would feel like it. In fact, he was going to use it to renew the world, to bring his people back to him. And my job, very simply, for which I would need a lifetime of training, was to defend the faith, hearten the faithful, and defend the faithful. Now, when I was 8, at one point, I realized that not everybody had these things going on, and I had told him, you know, I'll continue to go along with the training, but the minute you tell me to harm somebody, I'm going to a doctor, and I'm going to confess, and the jig is up. And I also gave him another condition. I said, you know, and while going through the training, that's great, but I'm not going to speak about this publicly. I'm not going to actually do anything unless there's an earthly authority to which I can submit with my whole heart, and it allows it, you know, because if this is really from God, he can do that. To my surprise, I thought he'd be upset. There were other conditions I put on. He had some conditions for me. I thought he'd be upset, but he treated me like I was a star pupil. I sometimes say he was so enthused, he was so tickled by what I said, I thought he was going to take me out for ice cream. And I'm still a little bit disgruntled that he didn't. During my 20s, I kind of thought that perhaps, I mean, I've always held responsible jobs. My counsel is trusted. I've worked in media and primarily politics and government at the federal level mostly, but at the state level too, some. And I thought that maybe this was just the way my mind processed a powerful intuition. You know, a little bit of a different way. I mean, we all have different ways of doing that. However, we got to the point in my late 30s where the world was showing too many symptoms of what I was showing. And I thought, okay, I need to tell somebody. So I started seeing a priest, first priest I ever told. And he had been a cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School before he became a priest. And that was back when Harvard Law School meant something, when it wasn't just an indoctrination center. He's 84 now. And he told me the first time we talked, he said, "Oh, Charlie, dismiss that. It's almost always a delusion." And that one of the things I loved, he always said, faith is an act of the will. I love that. We can't always feel it, but we always know the basic things we should do, and we can do it. And he taught that in what we call the dry periods, they're some of the most productive periods of all. But we don't know it until after they're over. That's when we reach out. If we continue to do the things we should, that's when we reach out the most strongly towards God. So when he told me to dismiss it, I thought, okay, frankly, at that time, you look at the world today, if you're being told your whole life that this is coming and even worse, it's pretty scary. You want to get out of that. You know what I mean? So I was enthused. I thought I had gotten out of something. But my angel did come to me and tell me that, Charlie, you didn't play fair. You need to tell him the contents of this particular vision from my visitation in March of '93. And if he dismisses you then, you're honorably dismissed. So I did. And midway through, I mean, I told him, he kind of gave me a grin. He said, well, all right, fine, Charlie. He said, let's get this over with, and then we'll get to the important things. So I told him. Midway through, he got a distant look on his face, and when I finished, he kind of sat there in silence for a minute and said, well, you better keep me informed after all. Since then, I have worked with 3 priests. They're priests of Opus Dei. Let me make clear, this is not a project of Opus Dei. I think there's some people up at the top levels in Europe that are having conniptions over it. But I like priests of Opus Dei because the authentic charism of Opus Dei is to find sanctification through your ordinary work. The way I talk about is ordinary. I fell in love with St. Teresa of Lisieux. She teaches the simple way. I like the simplicity. In fact, one of my priests, there's one that keeps the archives. Now, I don't director hop. They all work with each other. They all know what's going on, and they all share on this stuff. One keeps the archives. I wrote out everything for a long, well, I still do, on significant things. The one who keeps the archives, after he had been seeing me for a couple of years down in St. Louis, he looked at me and said, Charlie, he said, you know, everything you've told me has been true, except, you know, there's still things to come. He said, but I don't get it. It doesn't fit our charism. Our charism is to find sanctity through your ordinary work. And he tells me I looked at him and said, Father, this is my ordinary work. And he busted out laughing. Ever since then, we went through that. So, what is it? They have watched me for 20 years. They've got everything down. Right now, the priest who keeps the archives, when I write, and he's got a big job, I never put things to them first on what I write. I take full responsibility for everything I write. However, Father Mark, who keeps this, he reads everything I write. He reads all the articles, and he reads every comment. And if he sees something that gives him pause, then he calls me so that we can talk about it. Fortunately, he doesn't have too much to go on there, but we do talk to each other pretty regularly each week. I had fun in Los Angeles. My original priest is in Los Angeles now. I got to visit him about 2 weeks ago. And he looked at me. This stuff has always made him uncomfortable. When I came in and we sat down, he looked at me and said, "You know, Charlie, every time I see the news today, I think of you and think I heard it from you first." 20 years ago. You all know that the world's in a lot of trouble. And it has been. Everybody knows. My priest and I have joked for almost a decade now that it doesn't take a prophet to see where we're at right now. We're in some trouble. But I always talk to them about, and I'm going to get to the storm after I get through the way to get through everything, and then I'll talk briefly about the storm. Acknowledge God, take the next right step, and be a sign of hope. It's fairly important to discuss what that means, and very specifically, the simplest things you can go deep, deep, deep into them. The first part, acknowledge God. Hopefully everybody understands that, or has a pretty good idea of it. If you don't, we got more problems than I thought. We're going to need a bigger boat, as they said in a movie once. But take the next right step. Very important is to understand what is the next right step. How do you determine that? Well, we all know people who talk about how they'd love to save all the starving children in Africa, or they'd love in California to save the snail darter or whatever on things. They'd love to save. They always have something big and grandiose that they'd love to save. And yet they don't even notice when their neighbor is in some trouble. That's not compassion. That's not the next right step. In fact, that's vanity. They're not worried about caring for people around them at all. They're dreaming of the statues that will be erected to their nobility. They're like the old Pharisees that Christ condemned, that every time they gave a little money to the temple, they wanted somebody playing a trumpet ahead of them to show how great they were. That's not the next right step. And then, in our institutions now, completely corrupted. Business, media, universities, government. You have people that are utterly incompetent. They can't run their own lives, telling you precisely that you should do exactly what they say. They want to decide everything about your life, the we know better than you crowd. They're really like Wile E. Coyote. You know, they're constantly coming up with complex schemes which always blow up in their face, and coincidentally our face. They're splatting against the wall, falling to the bottom of the canyon, and it never seems to dissuade them from the idea that they ought to tell you how to run your life. That neither is the next right step. The next right step, the first thing you have to do is take responsibility for your actions and not try to coerce everybody else's actions. Now, some people who are a little wiser, they look around and they don't dream that they can control everything. But they see how big the problem is, and they see how little each of us can actually do, and they get frozen. They get paralyzed in place, that my little piece isn't going to mean anything, and they don't do anything. That also is not the next right step. Simply because I want you to remember that our God is a God of abundance. Our God is the God who, when the young boy gave him 2 little fish and a piece of bread, fed a multitude of 5,000. God never interferes with our will, ever. When you acknowledge God and take the next right step, you're handing your will over to Him. Now you will never have more than a couple of little fish. But when you hand that over to him of your own free will, he will transform a multitude with it. He wants you to do the little you can. Think about the man who came to him with a withered hand. You've read this story, healing story. The man came to him with a withered hand. Jesus could have just thought. The very thought would have healed him. But what he said to the man was, stretch out your hand. Now, with a withered hand, that may have been painful for him. But Jesus wanted him to stretch out his hand, and he was healed. He wants all of us to stretch out our hand. Very critical on things. Take the next right step. Take responsibility and act. Now, here's the other thing. People ask, how do I know whether it's actually the right step? Now, the answer to that is very simple. You don't. You take responsibility for what you do. Acknowledge God and take responsibility. I thank God that our toddlers are a lot smarter than we are about this. Because if it was us, about the 30th time we tried to walk and fell on our rumps, we'd say, well, this is a losing proposition. Thanks be to God, the little kids don't know that much, so they just get up and keep trying until they've taken a step. You're going to make a lot of wrong decisions. But our God is a loving God. When you show the initiative, he's proud. He'll help guide you. The first 100 times you may take the next wrong step. That's okay. Just like that little kid that's fallen on his rump. But when you do take an actual good step, our Father in heaven will not be looking at you and saying, well, it's about time. Instead, he'll have the heavenly Polaroid out and say, look, he took a step. He did it. He persisted. And I want you to think in that. Your kids, most of you have kids, grandkids and all that. You think your kids, I like to use the example of a 9-year-old boy because they can get pretty enthusiastic sometimes. You think your 9-year-old son comes to you with a project that's a little bit too big for him, but he wants to go after it, and he wants your help. You're proud of him. You're proud of him for his initiative. And you help him, knowing that he's going to make some mistakes. You gently correct his errors. Sometimes you gently reach over and correct the errors before he even knows that he's done something. But you're proud. You know he's going to grow up to be a good American because he'll go after it. Now, who is the child that you worry about? If you've got a kid that sits quietly with his hands folded in his lap and won't even tie his shoe without your permission and your guidance, you think, man, that boy needs some spirit. Do you think your Father in heaven loves you any less? He's proud of your initiative. He knows that you're going to mess up. What he wants you to do is take responsibility. The final thing I use to try to illustrate that is imagine if you've got a rowboat and it's sitting in the middle of a mountain lake. You want to go there, but it's pointed there. If you're sitting dead in the water, not moving at all, boy, it's real hard to get that rowboat turned over to there. But if you start rowing ever so gently, even a little bit, the lightest touch will shift it around and move it to where it needs to be. And that's what, unless this is God, I ain't answered it. It's not. Sorry. Okay. You know, I always try to remember to turn my phone off. You've had that happen where you're in the habit of doing it and you go to Mass. I had my sister, once I was taping a TV interview for one of my clients, and I knew the host in Chicago. And we went in, we were 5 minutes into the taping, and my phone rings. It's my sister. The host looks at me like, Charlie, you know better than that. I'm so sorry, but fortunately we were only 5 minutes into a half-an-hour interview, so we went through. Later, I was I was a permanent panelist on a WLS talk show in Chicago on Sunday nights. I'm sitting there, we're going through it, my phone rings. I forgot to turn it off. It's my sister, so I turned it off. Well, before I go to daily mass usually when I'm at home at Mother Cabrini Shrine in Golden. That's up in the mountains, or up in the foothills. In Colorado, we call them foothills. Everywhere else in the country I've ever been, they call it a humongous mountain. But I don't get any reception there. So I never bothered to turn my phone off. One day I'm sitting at Mass, my phone starts ringing. And I reach in, guy next to me asked, who is it? I hadn't even looked. I said, it's my sister. And when I looked after Mass, it was my sister. She has strange powers. The point is, take responsibility. That's what the next right step is. I once, when I was doing politics in statewide in Illinois, I had a meeting with pastors, priests, Christian activists on things, and I did a closed-door meeting, no media in there, no press, and I told them, I was kind of hot at the time, and I told them, said, look, some of you are doing some sloppy, incompetent, and even offensive work, and when you're called on it, you're saying, I'm doing God's work. Knock it off. You say God calls you to something, I say he calls me to something too. But I'll tell you what he doesn't call any of us to. He doesn't call us to do a sloppy, incompetent job and then blame him for our sloppy incompetence. You take responsibility for what you do, acknowledging God all the while. And if you're doing it right, it'll bear fruit. That doesn't mean you'll succeed, because what seems like success to us often is not success. Leave it to God, but take full responsibility. Give it your full heart, mind, and soul when you're doing that. That's what we're called to do. Don't be blaming God for your sloppiness. Now, be a sign of hope to those around you. This is very simple. You know, we live in a strange time. We live in a very cynical time. People have given up on the hope of eternity. And what they're really doing, it's a form of despair. When they give up on the hope of eternity, they settle for the Dollar General variety. And the Dollar General variety is trying to dominate everybody around them because they've lost hope. I say that the truth is, when you look closely, if you scratch the surface of a cynic, 9 times out of 10, what you'll find is a disillusioned idealist looking for a reason to believe. And what we're really called to do is to be that reason by our actions, not just by what we say on these things. I've worked with a lot of people where I had to be in proximity with others negotiating who were very powerful and very rich. Here's the reality in our toxic times. When you substitute means for ends, you will never find peace. If you think that money will buy you happiness, money is a useful tool. It's good to have. I wish I had more. But if you think money will bring you happiness, the guy that has $1 million and he's focused on that thinks, well, you know, when I get 5 million, I'll be happy. And then when he gets 5 million, he says, well, when I get 10 million, and then 50, and then 100. And no matter how much he gets, he's never happy. Power, same thing. Guy who's a little state legislator thinks that, man, if I could just get elected to Congress, it'd be cool. He gets elected to Congress and he thinks, man, if I could get elected to state treasurer, that'd be great. Then I'd be content. No matter where he goes, he's not content. So it is with romance. You know, our grandparents, and I'm talking about people our age, our grandparents had it right. Loving each other, truly committing to one person. We can't open our heart, we can't give our hearts to anyone. Young folks are caught up in hooking up and all of that sort of stuff, and they're in constant misery. They'll easily open their body, never open their hearts. That was what the sexual revolution was. We came to where we became incapable of opening our hearts. And I'm not condemning anybody, because there was a time when I was an eager recruit. Thanks be to God, I saw how toxic it is. What it is here's the great lie in all of this. It's like drinking seawater. If you're out at sea and you're dying of thirst, drinking seawater will relieve it for a moment, but at the cost of making you even sicker. And if you don't stop it, you'll die. A lot of people are spiritually dying out there. We owe them better. We owe them more compassion and charity than to continue to encourage and turn our heads the other way as they die right in front of our eyes. The funny thing is, when you get involved in other people's lives, when you start caring, when you start building up your community, and I don't care whether it's your neighborhood, your family, the first church is family. You start building up the family, you start building up those around you, you start taking an active interest in other people's lives. And without even trying, suddenly you find joy. Suddenly you find peace, suddenly you find contentment. Because when you're involved in other people's lives, they're involved in yours. I mean, helping to build them up, and they help build you up. They become part of your, to use a modern term, support system. We're so isolated today. You know, and that's one of Satan's greatest tools, is to try to isolate people. Build each other up. Work with other people, care for them, be a sign of hope to them. And that doesn't mean, again, we've gotten so accustomed to thinking in grandiose terms that you think you got to have some big plan. Say something nice when you could have said something mean. I have to work on that sometimes. When you see somebody down and just a little thing to help them, give them that little bit. Show that you care. When you give somebody a compliment, don't give them a generic compliment. Pay enough attention that you really know who they are. People know what their legitimate strengths and what their legitimate weaknesses are. They know if you're giving them a generic compliment, and when you do, they know it means nothing. See who they are. People love it when you recognize who they are. And suddenly, you find joy. So that's the key to those. We'll talk about those a little bit more. The storm. The big thing about the storm. What I talked about, what I always wrote for my priests, and what I saw from the beginning, was we would go into a period of crisis where everything would be tossed. Everything would be tossed up. We think we are sufficient to ourselves, and governments around the world would topple. The economic system for the whole world would come tumbling down. Everything was going to crash. We would go into a global civil war fought along cultural lines rather than primarily political lines. What does that mean? Political lines on that means you've got nation against nation. Cultural lines means you've got belief systems, sets of assumptions against other sets of assumptions. We're already in the early stages of that. You have people that are committed to believing that the only God is the state and the government, desperately trying to. Right now, if you're a Christian and you mean it, you can have your livelihood taken, you can have your house taken. I mean, look at the florists, look at the bakers. You know, once again, for the first time in a very long time, we have people in this country trying to establish a religious test for holding public office. I've even heard some Christians and conservatives saying that woman in Kentucky, Kim Davis, that she should have gone to jail for what she did. Really? So we should have a religious test that if you don't like it, resign? When the law of the land is that you have to make accommodation for religious conscience. We are in the midst of the beginnings of a cultural civil war, and it's been fought across the globe in Great Britain and Canada. There have been preachers that have been jailed, briefly, admittedly, and fined for teaching what's in the Bible, or for reading the Bible and calling it God's Word. It's already begun on that. Now, I had some people, I try to calibrate this properly. I had some people with these dire disaster movie scenarios. They're seeing the whole world wiped out, or 90%, or all of that. I was trying to dial them back, that it's really primarily a spiritual battle, which is true. There's a great battle has erupted, and each soul is the battleground. That's what this is about. But then I've had some people start to think that, oh, okay, it's just spiritual, that there's no real fighting involved in this. Wrong again. I'm talking about real war. I'm talking about real war in the physical plane, real war in the physical plane, in the spiritual plane on things. You try telling Christians in the Mideast, in North Africa, and in Central Asia that this is just a spiritual battle. While they're being beheaded, they're burned alive and all of that. And now it's spreading to Europe, it's spreading further in Asia. This is serious, and it's not going away. Now, when I talk about the crash, one of the things that I've talked about there is that we're going to come to a point where it's all going to come crashing down. Fortunately, there are a lot of secular commentators, economists, financiers. Victor Davis Hanson, the great classicist, is looking like, oh my Lord. They've caught up with part of what I was writing 20 years ago, that, oh my Lord, we're looking at a catastrophic collapse in the whole world. This is, and they're panicked about it. I'm glad they've caught up with that part. But also what I was writing from the beginning is that what this portends, it's prelude to a renewal, a great cultural renewal. You see the cultural crucifixion, yes, your fears are justified, but it's so God can bring us all back. The great terror of the last century is souls have been being lost to eternity at an unprecedented rate. That's the great evil in the world. Fortunately, since we think we're sufficient to ourselves, God's letting us see some of the consequences of what our actions bring on that. Here's what happens and why he's doing it. For those who are in rebellion, as long as they have confidence in human institutions, they will remain in rebellion. So God is allowing each of the props of that confidence to be knocked out. Now, when you lose all your confidence in what you thought had everything under control, you've got two choices. Go into despair and give up, or find a new source of hope. The only new source of hope is through God and through your neighbor, caring for each other. And that's why this is allowed to go. That's where you can make the biggest difference. Be that sign of hope to everyone. People start asking me, see, now with the storm, it's going to get worse, and I'll answer more questions after that. We're not going to prevail, ultimately. It'll keep getting worse. There's one thing that I've done. At the end of 2017, very late in 2017, I'm told that we will be miraculously and visibly rescued by Our Lady, the Immaculate Conception. We won't prevail. She will. And everybody will see it, and everybody will know it. Now, if that doesn't cause you to have a red flag, it should. Over the 20 years that I was writing for the priests, while I was right about everything that I wrote about, the one thing where I'd be off anywhere from 1 to 3 years, once 5 years, on the timing. And that's because talking with my angel, for most of the time, he says soon and now, usually soon, to which I've complained more than a few times that I think soon means something different to you guys than it does to us down here. I'm just saying. But on this, he was emphatic to tell everyone, late in 2017. Just before I went on the road for these journeys, I read an unrelated magazine article on something that gave me some insight. I thought, I think I know why he insists on that. What it was about shipwrecks near shore in storms. In most shipwrecks, where you've got where it sinks near the shore in the midst of a storm, most people die, and they die within easy swimming distance of shore. They die because of the storm. They can't see the shore, and they give up hope. They just give up, and it was needless. I think that God knows how rough it's going to be, and in a tremendous grace, a condescension, he's wanting me to let people know, don't worry. No matter how bad it looks, shore is a lot closer than you think. Hang in there. So I think it's a great grace on it. I get people asking me all the time. They want restless details, and I'm very careful about going into details. We've gotten into this situation because we think we can make a plan to evade God. Please don't do that. Do the little prudent things, but you can't make a plan. First thing you have to understand is the odds against us are not huge. They are hopeless. This is like you fighting Godzilla alone. Now, if you're fighting Godzilla alone, and you ask me, okay, is he going to step on me with his left foot or his right foot? What a dumb question. What difference does it make? You're completely outmanned. That's not going to help you a bit on things, you know. Here's the deal. We're completely overmatched. But Godzilla to God is like a gnat. So people are restlessly trying to figure out extra details so they can formulate a plan. Your plan is useless. I'm going to tell you, if there is no God, we're all doomed. If there is a God, and you think you are so clever that you can outwit him and come up with a way where you can evade the consequences of the storm, you're going to get crushed. The good news is you hold fast to Christ, and Satan has no power whatsoever over you. The only power when you hold fast to Christ that Satan has is to go boom and try to scare you and to let him go. Or to convince you that you are a great warrior, that you are the great and powerful, and that Satan trembles before you, hoping that he'll appeal to your vanity and you'll let go of Christ to show how great you are. I listen to people talk about what great spiritual warriors they are, and I shake my head. I try my best to convince them, please stop that. Because what I see, they think they're going out to do great battle, and what I see is a bunch of kindergartners with cardboard shields and plastic swords going to fight the Nazi Wehrmacht. They're going to get their heads handed to them. You can do nothing. Hold fast to Christ. Do the little that's right in front of you. Be a sign of hope to those around you. Take the next right step. You will never, ever have more than 2 little fishes to offer. If you try to handle it yourself, you won't even have enough to feed 2 people. If you hand it to Christ, it's multiplied. Hold fast to Christ. The truth is, our sword and our shield in this battle, and you got to take the next right step, but our sword and our shield is the rosary of Our Lady and the cross of Christ. That's it. Now, the next right step may mean defending people around you, and we'll get into that later, but understand the odds are hopeless. Quit trying to figure out ways to evade. Quit trying to figure out ways where you can come up with a better plan. Crash. People get worried about, okay, if everything crashes, if all of a sudden our money's worthless, if all of a sudden technology is failing and we don't have things, I mean, how am I going to get my meds? How am I going to, I'm sick. First of all, when we created this situation, there's going to be hardship for everyone. But there's 2 things I really want you to think about. The crash. When crash comes and it's visible to everyone, it's going to be hard for everyone. But that, while it's tough for you and for me, it's catastrophic for those who think they're the masters of the universe. The people that are trying to tell you exactly what you have to do to live their lives, here's a little secret. I bet you it's not that big of a secret to you. They're wimps and cowards. They are utterly powerless if they don't have institutional power behind them and technology to enforce the things they're trying to do. When it's gone, they're useless. Everybody will laugh at them. They'll float away like so much flotsam and jetsam. Who's going to rebuild? Who's going to make things work again? I'll tell you who it is, who the heroes are. Who the real heroes are, they're the people. It's not somebody riding in on a white horse from Hollywood. It's you, people who are committed to doing the little things, to helping your neighbors, to building communities, and making that work. You're the ones that are useful because you already know. We're in Carroll, Iowa. You do humble things. You try to support each other. You try to bring in the crops. You try to raise the cattle. You do those little things. You care for each other's and your neighbors. Those are the great heroes. Faith, family, freedom. That's what it's all about. You're not trying to impose your will on anyone. That's how we get back to this, and that's how we will rebuild, to confront the things that we have to and to endure until rescue comes. That's the first thing about this. This is the beginning of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, and you're participating in it by doing the little you can. Now, when you think about, we are like Gulliver. We've just tied ourselves down in knots. We're caught in so much undergrowth, underbrush, and everything. When crash comes, that doesn't mean there's going to cease to be doctors and nurses and lawyers and people that have real work to do. What it means is that doctors, instead of spending all day filling out paperwork to try to satisfy their government overseers, are going to be able to care for people. As with nurses, farmers are going to be able to raise their crops, do the things that they've done without having to work about, did they get the right subsidy? Did they get, what's going to happen is you're going to have an explosion. It's one of the great things, an explosion in productivity, because people can do what their jobs are again. This is one of the reasons why the masters of the universe are doomed to failure. Do you know what the single most powerful force on earth is? The creative capacity of a single person. That's the greatest force on earth. We are created. Everyone in here was made in God's own image. The Enlightenment made a terrible mistake. It had a lot of things to recommend it, but it treated man as a mere consumer. Somebody who, when you give him food, shelter, and companionship, he should be content. No, you give that to your dogs and cats, they'll be content, but that's not what a man is. God's fundamental nature is to the love that processes between the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Creation erupts like a fountain, like a spring at the top of a mountain, and that we're made in His own image. We're fundamentally creators with Him, subordinate to Him, but creators with Him. When you can do the work of your own hands, you find joy and you find dignity. Now, why cannot the anti-Christians that are taking over the world, they can't succeed because that creative force is powerful. They want to suppress it. They're the masters. What you want to create is not worthy. So you quit creating. You just eat, sleep, and be happy, because we're going to give you everything. They're very limited. I don't care who you are. If you've only got a couple of people using their creative capacity, you've got very little. What does God do? He calls people to treat each other as brothers and sisters. And everybody, do the work of your own hands. Don't do my work, do your work. Everybody here has something to offer. And when that happens, it unleashes it across the world. That really is part of what the beauty of the American system was at the beginning. It valued and unleashed the creative capacity of each of its citizens. It's why it suddenly became the most powerful country in the world. So that's what's really happening at the beginning of the triumph. And I want you to look up. When you see this stuff, quit being terrified on things. Quit being fearful. I've seen in the last couple of weeks, I guess there's a lot of sites that write about, it's coming on this day or that day. I don't know. I get annoyed because every day I read in different sites how supposedly I've said it's coming next Friday or it's coming. The only thing I've said about a time is that we will be rescued in late 2017. When crash comes, it will take me by surprise. And I want, when that time comes, to be found by God doing my ordinary work. Whether it's here, whether it's next week, whether it's next month, or whether it's the first part of next year, I want to be found doing my ordinary work and doing it with extraordinary love, rather than wringing my hands. Oh, what am I going to do? If you're worried about what you're going to do, it's hopeless. Christ will show you what you need to do. Hold fast to him. When I say to you, be a sign of hope, that's not just, obviously, that may help save other people's lives, but it may save your life too. Keep you from panicking. Keep you doing the right things. Now, yeah, when crash comes, what I look at it as, it's kind of like if it were a movie. The movie would be called Return of the Jedi. We're coming back on things. I want to tell you. I got to sit down for a minute. I had some neurological damage, and I can walk. I start hurting after a bit. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of pilgrimage stories. I think most of you know. I walked across the country a few years ago. Didn't really walk. I didn't go from shore to shore. I went on a pilgrimage. Took a year and a half, 3,200 miles, and that. Some wonderful stories I learned about the way the world works. I mean, one of the funny things is we worry about silly little things. I mainly slept in the woods. Sometimes people would invite me in. Sometimes I get tired enough. The way I did it, I gave away everything I had before I left, but I had signed up for a studio, an online studio. I brought my laptop with me, and I'd stop in libraries and I'd write little articles for Demand Media. In fact, if you look at EHOW, Joe McElroy, that would be me. I'd write silly little articles, things like, how to change the headlight in an 87 Acura. I don't know why that headline always sticks in my head. They'd pay me $15 a piece through PayPal, and that's how I financed a lot of it. But people worry about the silliest things. One of the things that I just loved when I was walking is people would often, when they got the idea, I'm sleeping in the woods and everything, people would often ask me, what do you do when it rains? And that gave me the opportunity to give them a cheery smile and say, usually I get wet. What do you think about getting wet? You dry off soon enough on that. But people worry about this stuff, You get wet, you dry off. Some lessons I learned in it, and I wrote down, because I'll start going. When I start going on stories from the pilgrimage, there was so much. I'm going to tell you a few things. First night out, I never walked with traffic. Never hitchhiked. I was always walking against traffic. But I figured if somebody stopped, that was God's way of saying, y'all need to talk. So I'd talk. Now, you got to understand, when I talk to folks, I just like to talk about what they're interested in, what I'm interested in. I am not a guy that starts in, the first words of our conversation is, do you know your Jesus? Are you saved? We talk about whatever it comes in. First night out, I'm picked up by a young couple. They're in a cab and a half truck, super cab, I think they call them. In the back is their baby daughter, about a year and a half old. I love kids. I'm kind of the baby whisperer. I've been taking care of kids since I was 6 years old. I'm the oldest of 6. They tell me their story, and their story is very simple. They're living with his mother at the time, but they've gotten themselves a trailer, and with that trailer, they're saving up to get the power turned on, and as soon as they do, they're moving into their own trailer. Pretty cool. Although, if they're saving up to get the power turned on, you know that their last name was neither Trump nor Rockefeller. So I told them my story when I was launching off and doing it. They were utterly charmed. They thought that was great. They stopped at a McDonald's. We drove about 7 miles. They stopped at a McDonald's. It was right across from a copse of woods where I was going to make camp for my first night. And I could get some coffee. I do like my coffee. Then the young man, he tried to slip me a 5. And I told him, I said, oh, no. Get your power turned on. Get you and your wife. What a terrible mistake. His face fell. He had been so enthused, and his face absolutely fell. I had hurt him. I never made that mistake again. When someone offered me spontaneous help on things, I accepted and gave grateful thanks. I learned something from that. People want to reach out to each other. They don't want to be taken advantage of. Nobody wants to be played. But people's hearts reach out to each other. It's one of the great things I learned going across this great land on the things. And I never did that again. In fact, there came a time I was talking with a priest, a different priest, and he had told me at one point, those of you who read the website, you know I can get a little bit testy at times if you hit the right button. He had told me, he had said at one point, he said, Charlie, we always have to help the less fortunate. And it just hit me wrong. And I looked at him and said, no, Father, that's not what Christian charity is. It's close, but it's not quite it. We are to help each other as loving brothers and sisters because we are all the less fortunate, weighed down by the burden of original sin. Christian charity is not a condescension of the greater to the lesser. We are to help each other as loving brothers and sisters. And what that means is that if you see someone that's hurting, that you can help, don't wait for them to ask. Help them. When you do that, you're laying up treasure in heaven for yourself. But in these next few years, everybody's going to need help. Middle-class Americans, they can get themselves pretty good about offering to help. They have a tougher time and accepting it sometimes. If somebody comes and sees that you need a little help and they offer, don't you do that middle class thing, oh no, it'll be okay. You accept with gratitude. Don't rob them of the treasure that they would lay up for themselves in heaven. Loving brothers and sisters every time. You know that if your brother was hurting and you knew about it, you'd help him. And he'd be grateful for it. And there would be no greater and lesser. If you were hurting, if you've got a healthy family, if you were hurting, your brother or sister would help you because loving brothers and sisters expand that. That's what Christian charity is. And as far as reaching out to each other, I got to tell you, Baton Rouge. I stayed in one of the roughest parts of Baton Rouge. I made friends with a librarian. But one thing you should know, almost any place, particularly in the South, in the lower Midwest and all that, I don't care if you're in the middle of the city, you can find a copse of woods. And you can be in the roughest part of town, and here's a little tip, news you can use. If you find yourself in a rough section of town, the meanest, baddest gangbanger in the world is terrified of the woods at night. I don't know why. They are. Every time you're perfectly safe, duck into the woods, they're terrified of the woods at night. I don't know why. It's truth, though. So if you're ever in a rough section, well, I was spending there. It was getting close to Easter, and my son was going to come visit me. We were going to meet in Baton Rouge. He was going to spend a week with me as part of my pilgrimage. I'm walking back from the library, going to my little copse of woods, when a car, an old beat-up car, pulls up next to me. And inside, in the front, two young black folks, a man and a woman, between 25 and 30. They had the gang tats on them. Now you live out in the country, you may not recognize gang tats when you see them. Those of you who've lived near a big city, you know what I'm talking about and everything. They were gangbangers. They reached out a plastic bag, and I took it, and I started to talk, because I talk to everybody. I started to talk, but as soon as I had it, they went screeching away. So I looked in the bag, and you know what was in there? There were juice boxes. There were snacks, potato chips, little cakes, all of that sort of stuff. What had happened, they had seen this old white man that looked like maybe he was a little bit down on his luck, maybe a lot down on his luck, walking in there, and they had stopped at the convenience store. Their hearts went out. They wanted to help. Of course, they had a reputation to maintain, so they didn't want anybody to know that their hearts were reaching out. But I'm telling you, our hearts do reach out to each other everywhere. Gal in San Antonio, homeless gal. I met her. I met a lot of homeless people while I was out there. I mean, for some reason they knew pretty quickly that I wasn't one of them, but that I was certainly an ally, and that, well, this gal was somewhere between 19 and 30. When they're homeless and they're out there for a while, you don't know for sure. She was young. She was bubbly and everything. She wanted to know if I wanted to share a beer with her. Now, she wasn't asking me to buy. She already had her quart of beer. And I sat down with her and chatted with her for a while. She told me her story. What her story was that her boyfriend was in jail. He was going to be getting out in about 2.5 months. And when he did, they were going to make a life for themselves in Arizona. So she wanted to know what my deal was. And I told her what I was doing. She was utterly charmed. She thought that was great. We talked for a while. We talked for a little over an hour. And then when we were done, she was living out there. I needed to get moving along. I needed to make some time that day. And I told her, I said, look, I said, this is, I always put the best face on it, but you live out here. You're living out on the streets, It's a lot harder than it looks. So please say a few prayers for me that I persist. Well, when I asked her that, she burst into tears. I mean, just sobbed. And I'm like, I'm sorry, hon. I didn't mean to. What's wrong? For you men there, I always have to interject this. My family is from Alabama. I'm from the South. 3.5, I moved up to Chicago. Here's the thing. If you're ever in the South and you're at a restaurant and you don't call the waitress hon or darling or sweetie, she thinks you're mad at her. You'll get lousy service, okay? On the other hand, if you're in the North and you call a waitress or a woman hon, sweetie, darling, she thinks you're hitting on you. So once again, no matter where in the country you are, we can't win for losing. Anyway, she finally calmed herself down, and she looked at me and she said, a lot of people have told me that they'd pray for me, but you're the first person that ever asked me to pray for them. Do you really think my prayers would do any good? And I said, well, of course they would. Prayers are always good. She burst into tears again. You women, I'm telling you. Finally, she calmed down, and she said a little prayer with me. But I thought about that. That really stuck with me. Often, if you're close friends with somebody, we tell each other, we'll pray with each other, we'll pray for each other. And that's perfectly fine. But when you have had an argument with somebody, or when you don't quite approve of what they're doing, often when you say, I'll pray for you, what they hear is condescension and condemnation. And the reality is, that's often what you're doing and what I'm doing. I learned that. So here's what I resolved after that. Anytime, particularly if we've had a dispute or an argument, I'll ask people to pray for me. Because when you do that, you never take their dignity away from them. Often you surprise them by doing it. And prayer is always good. If they're wrong and they actually pray, it'll help them. If I'm wrong, it'll help me. If we're both wrong, which often is the case, it'll help us both. And it preserves their dignity. So I've always thought of that. I got to tell you, I like to tell this one, the fellow in Ventura. And I don't tell it often enough. Again, how people's hearts reach out to each other. I was just getting ready. I was finishing up. I had moved up from the coast on Southern California. I was getting ready to go into the mountains of Los Padres National Forest, which is a lot of mountains there. And I was in Ventura, California just before I was getting ready to go up. I found a beautiful spot, secluded. I mean, it was right across the street from a Wendy's, so I'd be able to get a good breakfast and coffee the next morning before I went into the wilderness for a few weeks. Just perfectly set around with trees and everything. I had made camp. I'm all settled. Well, after I get settled, this old fella comes in. He comes trudging in. He's carrying a big old plastic bag taller than he was with cans. And I look at him and I said, oh, I'm sorry, this is your spot? I'll get up and move. And I started packing up, and he says, no, don't worry about it, you're already settled. He said, I've got another spot. And it had a place where you could store things that wouldn't be seen either. He said, I got another spot, you stay here tonight, you're already settled, I'll go, maybe I'll even meet a friend over there. And he takes this big thing of cans. He said, how do you hold it out? You got any money? I said, oh, I'm okay, which homeless people will say to each other with that. And he takes this big sack of cans that he obviously had spent the day carrying. He said, well, listen, if you need a little money, the recycling center is right over here. And he gave me direction. He said, you go ahead and take those cans over there, and you get you enough so that you can get you something to eat and get through. Well, of course, I didn't. I stayed there that night, and I set his cans away so that they were safe when he came back the next day, hidden so that they wouldn't get stolen in the meantime. But again, a homeless man, his heart reached out to eat. Always. Our hearts want to reach out. That's our default setting. That's one of the great things. Satan tries to isolate people. That's when the self-will run amok has done us so much damage. It's actually why I wanted to, at the beginning of the year, I decided I got to come around the country. I got to start talking to people because I can't change everything, but I knew that Christians were going to be persecuted, that there was a lot going on this year. They were going to be marginalized, and right now, you go out in mixed company, you're afraid, Lord have mercy, you start talking about your sweet Jesus, they're liable to have the district attorney coming to visit you, I wanted people to know you're not alone. And I love it. There's usually a time with the crowd when they look around and they see we really are not alone. There's people in my own community just like me. In fact, I think there's John, is there a sign-out sheet?
Not yet.
Okay. If there's a sign-out sheet, I like for the local organizers to be able to get folks together. A lot of places where I've been, they have coffee clutches, they have prayer meetings, they have little groups that do little projects, and they just get together and talk, because you know that when you're in this room, you can talk about how much you love Jesus, and you don't have to worry about the sheriff knocking on your door or anybody suing you for it. Another story, I just love this story. It's not really a pilgrimage story, but my sister Kim used to work, she was the assistant manager of a farmer's co-op. Now, I reckon you all around here know about farmer's co-ops. She was down in Alabama. I got a lot of tomato farmers down there and everything. I was down there, and I was going to go visit her. I figured I'd stop by there and say hi. When I went in, they were covered up with business. She had come out to run one of the registers, and every register was 3D. Building little cabins, building bunk houses, doing things to take people in if they're displaced during troubles. I love that generosity of spirit. Today, I had the pleasure of visiting the Domus Trinitatis. Sister Marie. Sister Marie has said, thanks be to God. She doesn't know this. I don't know if she can write. I hope she can, because I'm going to invite her to write a guest column. The community that she's building out there, something very special is happening here in Carroll County, Iowa. I'm very excited. I spent some time with Scott going around his farm, just doing it the way it should be done. I spent some time with Sister Marie visiting that. This is the way we should live. Live in community, building each other up. I absolutely loathe the way Satan's tool is to isolate. We've isolated the generational cohorts. When I see one of those 55 and only communities, I think, how sad. We need the energy of our younger people, the idealism, the enthusiasm. They need the wisdom of the older folks. We need each other. God intended all of us to work together, and I think of everything I've seen, I think Sister Marie has been sent to show how we're supposed to rebuild communities and live in healthy communities, and I'm deeply touched by it. So you've got a great resource here, and I ask you, please, give your full support and enthusiasm to Sister Marie. I'm sure you already have. When John said, Sister Marie says, he's okay. I figured, okay, they got it. But you help that woman. God bless her. And now, I'm going to do quickly a prayer. How many of you are familiar with the Flame of Love devotion? Good. In fact, I was on the phone with Tony Mullen last night. Tony Mullen, who's the national director of it. I love it because it's a prayer for our time. It's very simple. It's from the Diary of Elizabeth Kindleman. I have written that last December, demons started spewing out to cover the earth, to create dissension in families, to start creating so much despair as they could. Every time you say a Hail Mary, it's a body blow. It rocks the demons that are in your vicinity. The flame of love devotion spreads the benefits of each Hail Mary to the whole world. It rocks the whole cohort of demons that are around us. It's very simple. I'd like to say it together, but I'll tell you what it is. Right after you say, pray for us sinners, you add, and spread the effect of the grace of thy flame of love over all humanity, now and at the hour of our death. I'll say it again, right after the pray for us sinners, and spread the effect of the grace of thy flame of love over all humanity, now and at the hour of our death. Now I'd like for us to say it together. When we do, when I get to the pray for us sinners, if you can remember it, say it. If not, pause. Half of you will probably just say now and at the hour of our death. I understand that. It took me about a dozen times before I quit doing that. It's kind of like when they changed the missal. The priest would say, peace be with you. And you'd say, and also with your spirit. Try to get it right. It takes a little time, so don't worry about it. But let's say it together. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, and spread the effect of the grace of thy flame of love over all humanity, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Thank you. Remember that. Just look up Flame of Love, Anthony Mullen, and you'll get it. He has been sending out booklets, 70 booklets for every city I go to, and that just to be distributed for free to everyone. Unfortunately, I've had a vigorous schedule. This is my 26th city since the summer started. He ran out of books. They're on back order, so you get shortchanged. But if you look it up, Flame of Love, he'll send you one. Now, having done that, questions. Let's get to it. I'm sure somebody has a question. Yes, sir. Was that your sister that called? I love it. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was Lisa Fixler, who owns the Full of Grace Supply House. She handles everything, for distribution when people want to order things, and she was laughing. She told me, I know you're in a presentation, but you know the Birmingham video? How many have seen the Birmingham video? So many people, and I don't know why people want this when they can just watch it free online, but some people wanted it on DVD. So she got them produced. Well, the first set that she got produced would play on a computer, but not on a TV. So she had to replace it. The second set, when she got them produced, they're only $5 when she got them produced. Just after an hour, the sound loops back and goes back to the beginning. The video works, and they didn't understand why. And Lisa had called me and said, Satan just hates you. He hates this video. And that she called me because they had 800. We're going to be in Covington, Louisiana, or New Orleans, for Mark Mallet and I will be together. She had ordered 800 of them, and the outfit that produced them, they're completely garbled. So she said, so tonight I'm going to say a prayer of miraculous trust and ask St. Joan to take care of it out there. But no, it wasn't my sister. Yes, ma'am.
Will millions of people die when a great storm comes?
Well, when the great storm comes, will millions of people die? Let me first say on that pardon? Oh, I thought somebody said something. Let me first say that we see things very differently here than they see them in heaven. From the perspective of eternity, when a soul is lost to eternity, that's a grave tragedy. And throughout the last century, we've been being lost at an unprecedented pace. In this world, if you die in a state of grace, that's sorrowful. Jesus wept when Lazarus did. But it only means that you're born to heaven. That's not a disaster. We worry about the little things instead of worrying about the big things. Worry about him who kills the soul. That being said, in this comprehensive conflagration, I made a mistake. I said a specific number, and it's not that the specific number is not right. I said a specific number. I'm a historian by training. That's primarily what my education was in school. And so immediately when I'm looking at the raw data, when I was given the raw data, what I thought was, that's amazing that the number should be that low for such a comprehensive conflagration. When I say the raw number, though, people tend to go, oh my God. So what I have taken to doing is saying, as far as physical casualties go, we will only have about a third as many physical casualties as we had in World War II, which is a remarkably small number. Don't worry so much about those who are going to die here. Worry about those whose souls will perish for eternity. Turn your will over to God. Yes, there are going to be a goodish number of people who won't make it through the storm. And I go further than this. One of the things I told my priests about a decade ago, you're going to have, you've probably already seen, because I've heard it all over the country, untimely deaths. God wants all his kids back. When you see an untimely death, a lot of times it's an act of mercy right now. God knows certain souls are not strong enough to endure the storm with their soul intact. So he brings them into their last state of grace and plucks them so that they're not lost to eternity. They now intercede for us on our behalf, and you will be reunited with them. So, anyway, next question.
Are we kind of already in this storm?
Yes, we have been in the storm for about 6 years. We're not in the fullness of the storm. We're very close to the fullness of the storm. But you look around, I mean, with everything. You know, how many of you have heard that prophecy? See, this is one of the reasons why you've got to be very careful about prophecy. I talked to some substantial people out east and out west on the thing. Have you heard that prophecy of how the earth is going to change, shift on its axis? Some of you have heard that. I've heard a lot of people all worried about that and everything because they imagine that, okay, let's get Steven Spielberg to direct the disaster movie sequence here and everything, and maybe that'll happen. But what I've told people is that's already happened. Frequently, in visitations and visions, apocalyptic imagery is used. When I was young, in my 20s I would suppose, I had many ordinary things I was shown with horrifying apocalyptic imagery, and I was terrified, and then it would happen and it would be a little fizzle. Here, I think, oh, that's not so bad. Then I realized, no, it was that bad. Because we see things from here, we're blind as moles. We see them from our perspective. What damages, what mutilates, what causes a soul to perish is what is a disaster on that. It's not the little physical things that are the disasters. So I learned to be a little wiser about that. I told people throughout the country that whether or not we get the disaster movie, that prophecy has already come to pass. I've gotten a few people like, how? How do you mean? Because 1600 years ago, the Emperor Constantine made Christianity a favored religion. Ever since then, in Western civilization, our foundational assumptions have been fundamentally Christian. We haven't lived it well at times, but the assumptions, that is the good that we seek. They're fundamentally Christian. We've been fraying at the edges for about a couple of decades anyway, probably longer than that, but with the election in Ireland, which legalized homosexual marriage, with the Supreme Court's lawless decision imposing it here in this country for the first time in 1600 years, and that's just an outward symbol, our foundational assumptions are no longer Christian, they're pagan. Our cultural and faith, the axis that our culture and faith revolve around, have shifted, and a terrible shift it is. That's been Now that doesn't mean we won't get the disaster movies, so let's keep Steven Spielberg to the side. We may need him after all, but that has been fulfilled. And that's the thing that we need to understand on this stuff. Now, I don't know if I really answered your question. Okay. If I get rambling and all that sort of stuff, and if I miss the question, just smack me and I'll try again. Who else? That's you again. 3 to a customer now.
Do you have the same, and it should make any difference who does it, the same angel that reveals to you what happened?
There is one angel that has been assigned to train me since childhood. He's like a big brother to me. It's not my guardian angel. And I'll go ahead and tell you who he is because I've written it before. I don't like to because I don't like people to get into speculation on this stuff. I don't like people to get into storm chasers. Remember, knowing what's going to happen is vastly overrated and tougher than you think. Knowing how to behave whatever happens, that's where it's at. The key to everything is acknowledge God, take the next right step, be a sign of hope on the things. I pray to God that, give me everything I need to get people safely to the other shore of the storm. But please don't give me one iota more. I don't want to know. I'm surprisingly uncurious about this. But the angel, and because there's a little bit of a funny story with it, he's been like a big brother to me. He's wonderful. And just before the turn of the millennium, I started thinking, he never told me who he was. He was just the angel assigned to train me. And I started thinking, this is an archangel. I know this is an archangel. And I started, trying to check and see who it was. I started suspecting it was Michael. And I went through that for about 3 weeks. And about the 3rd week, he appeared to me, arms folded, deeply unhappy, and said, "I'm Gabriel," and vanished. And ever since then, I've teased him that you can't say that you angels don't have a little vanity. But that's who's been charged. I'm fairly reticent about that because all too often people think, oh, that's the archangel that announced to Our Lady. I mean, this is big, He's like a big brother to me. And I thought it really wasn't. At first I thought it doesn't have so much to do with Our Lady. But there's a demon that imitated Gabriel in a way for the foundation of Islam. When I say that he's like a big brother to me, he loves us. We get most everything wrong, and he knows that, but he treats us like cute little puppies. He's delighted. He's overjoyed when we get things close to right, He just loves us. And I take it very personally. Having the relationship I do with them, I take it very personally when I read that they slander him, that he's a murderous thug, wants to people to brutally kill anybody who isn't right. That hits me pretty hard. On the other hand, Gabriel, we're leading into the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. So it's very appropriate to me, too, that he would be the one to train me. He's a pretty good, he's so friendly. He's so nice that the few times, I got to tell you a couple of Gabriel stories. And how our vanity, this one about our vanity a little bit. I was warned, again, right around the turn of the millennium, that I had been hidden for a long time in plain sight. And the Satan, there were many suspects for the work that I was called to do. But the Satan knew me, and he was going to start targeting me with some false visions. At that time, what I did, that I needed to be wary and watch. Well, I set up a set of protocols that I've never spoken aloud of. I've never written down, even for my priests. They know, but we don't talk about them and all that before I will even begin to consider a vision potentially authentic. Sure enough, I started getting these visions that were just lovely, except they'd have one thing just a little bit off, not a lot off, but a little bit that was objectively wrong. I'm very good about compartmentalizing things. I would immediately dismiss it from my mind. In fact, there's only one little bit of one of those that I can remember at all. I started thinking that I'm pretty good at this. You know, I recognize these things. I get them out of there. I was feeling pretty cocky. And when I did, Gabriel appeared to me in one of the very few times he was unhappy. He looked at me and just said with more than a little disgust that made me ashamed, he said, he's not trying to convince you of what's in the visions. He's trying to convince you he's clumsy. And he almost succeeded. Satan is very tricky, and our vanity always lurks. As soon as I started thinking I'm pretty good at this, I was falling into Satan's hands. Then the final thing, it was always my habit to pray. Every time I'd be visited, to pray that, please let this storm pass. Let it pass us over so that we don't have it, so that it doesn't come. In July of 2000, I was visited by Gabriel in '97 when I had formally and finally made a final decision. I was told that the storm was the only instrument strong enough to bring us back, that if this wasn't allowed, it was the end. Nonetheless, for several years, I'd still whimper and whine. July of 2000, I'm visited by my angel, and I start immediately with the whimpering and whining. And, he was going to talk to me about a few things, that please let the storm pass us over. Well, my buddy, I knew from this why the ancients were so terrified and intimidated by the angels. I don't know exactly what happened. I mean, I know he didn't really get bigger, but he seemed huge all of a sudden, bigger than the house, and radiant, and fiercely intimidating. And I'll never forget what he said to me, even though I still don't exactly understand it. He looked at me and he said, "You must tell them true and they must choose or perish." Like I said, I didn't exactly understand what it meant, but I knew it meant for me to quit whining. And so I did after that. And immediately after that, he was just as sweet as can be again. He seemed normal. Believe it or not, he can be pretty chatty. That's just where it is. So, anyway, I think I pretty well covered that one, haven't I? Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about is there going to be some semblance of a civil order, national sovereignty that we maintain?
Good question. Good question. He's asking, is there going to be some sort of a civil order, all of that sort of thing, national sovereignty? In the course of this, once crash comes, and there are many places that have had catastrophic collapse before, financial and otherwise, everything is thrown into a tizzy for a while. It's like taking the deck of cards and tossing them up. For a while, you may see there'll be complete chaos for anywhere from 2 to 4, maybe even 6 months, but I think 2 to 4 is about right. During that period, I know very little about that period. Like the rest of you, I'll be keeping my head low and getting through it. We may have 4, 5, 6, 7 national leaders during that time. It's typical of when something goes into a real collapse. You get juntas and you get all of that. After that, though, we've still got a lot of work to do. And God has a plan. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to speak much about that right now. That I do know something about. A new order will raise. We won't have an election a presidential election in 2016. God has a different plan. He's going to carry us through so that we can rise from our knees of a shattered people and help get through this. And so there will be a national order. You will work, you will do your things, and all of those sorts of things. But this is, for those of you who are old enough to remember the Ed Sullivan Show, this is God's really big show. He's going to be revealing himself in ways to those who would hear him. And I'm not allowed to give any spoiler alerts on that, but he is going to raise us up so that we can confront. That's not the end. That's the beginning of us acting as a truly Christian people throughout the world on the thing. You are not going to be left bereft. You can always call on God, and he will respond to those who call on him. I hope that answers. That's about as much as I can say about it. Yes, sir.
You said that you have been speaking all over and everything, all over the place. What
No, very simply, what drives me to speak, first of all, I knew at the end of last year, I saw, and I wrote about it, a volcanic spewing of demons throughout the world to spread dissent, to spread despair, to spread division in families, division among friends, division, and all of these were to try to get people into despair before the storm came. I saw the oppression of Christians that would of Christianity, of expressions of faith that would be coming throughout the world, and I knew one of Satan's most important tools is isolation. So I decided, wherever I'm invited, and I can't go everywhere I'm invited, but where people set something up, I'll go and I'll speak. Not so much because you need to hear me, although it doesn't hurt, and I like to be heard. I like to talk. You've probably figured that out now. But because when people feel besieged, they need to know that they're not alone. So I didn't go so much. In my website right now, I get about 12,000 visitors a day from 25 to 30 countries, and people have been asking. I didn't have to go chasing after people in different areas. People would ask, and once they knew I was going to go, they wanted to put things together. So I had told the woman who does my scheduling, don't try to create something out of nothing where you've got people that are asking and that want to volunteer and put it together. Let's go. And that's the whole thing. I figure that way God's choosing where I'm going to go. And God chose that I come to Carroll, Iowa, and boy, I sure am glad he did. Yes. And then I'll get back to you. See, then now this will be your third, so I'll get her first, and then you got your last.
My brother-in-law, so take me first.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Does your angel say anything about the Catholic Church during all this?
About the Catholic Church. Let me be clear on this. I was never told. I was a Protestant for a long time. And you may wonder, why didn't they tell you? I thank God they didn't tell me. And that's going to lead to a couple of things. First of all, I started, coming from Southern fundamentalists. Southern fundamentalists had in those days, my parents didn't, but Southern fundamentalists had a horrible prejudice against Catholics. They'd say some mighty ugly things about Catholics. And all. I had broken with them silently. I didn't want to hurt my parents when I was 16 for various reasons. In fact, when I was 16, I started studying the origins of the various churches. That was the first real tickle in my mind because, again, I was a historian. I looked back, and the only church that had a legitimate historical claim to having been found by Jesus is the Catholic Church. The Orthodox, that's another story, and they can have a subordinate claim, but the Catholic Church by far had the best, and I thought, Well, I started going through various denominations trying. I read the Bible relentlessly, over and over again. I probably read the whole Bible 20, 25 times on things, trying to find what was true and trying to put it in the context, the way the hearers of the time would hear it. I mean, so much of what we do is so superficial on the thing. A simple thing, now Catholics understand it better, but Protestants, my Protestant forebears didn't understand it at all. The Good Samaritan. The whole point of that story is that Samaritans were unclean, that they were filth. I mean, to get it its shock value that it has in modern times, you'd have to have the story be about the good drug pusher. You know what I mean? We've lost the sense. In our time, Samaritan is synonymous with good. In Jesus' time, Samaritan was synonymous with low life. So I tried to see the Bible with fresh eyes. I'd go to different denominations, and here's a secret. I don't know how many of you are Catholic. I would presume most of you are. Some of my hosts have been Protestants. There's a myth among Catholics and Protestants that Protestants know the Bible better than Catholics. I used to believe it myself, but it ain't true. What most Protestants, particularly the Southern fundamentalists, know is they've got anywhere from 15 to 30 verses that they can quote chapter and verse, and that's about all they know. Catholics do have a better sense of the sweep of Scripture. So what I do is, going into each denomination, I'd look at where each of them have an emphasis. They emphasize one set of doctrines, and they completely ignore anything in the Bible that contradicts them. They don't intentionally do it. They just read over it in a gloss. So I'd ask them the uncomfortable questions when I saw where it was. If the preacher or whoever looked at me like they didn't understand what I'm talking about, or tried to use authority, telling me just mind my business, then I was gone. I finally despaired of finding that at all, although I found a lot of good, faithful people in those churches. In all of that time, I was never told what church to go to. By leading me through that path, I was able, I speak Protestant a lot of times. You're using the same words if you're talking to a Protestant, but they have different meanings. And it's not really that anybody means to offend each other, it's just that you're talking about different things and don't know it. So what I have been told by my angel about that quite emphatically is that during these times, all faithful Christians, Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, and faithful Jews, are to be treated as full and equal partners in the work before us, and that all people of goodwill of any other faith are to be treated as true neighbors. That as we do this, and don't ameliorate your faith, live your faith properly, but if we do this, treating people as full and equal partners, God himself will see to the unity. And that will be one of the fruits of the storm, that we will all be one once more. Now, that leads into another thing. I've had people say to me, Charlie, you're Catholic, that means we win. And I tell them, no, that's not how it works. How it works is like this. That unity that God is going to bring about, if we act, if we just acknowledge him, take the next right step and be a sign of hope, it'll be like a joyful family reunion where everyone brings a dish. Our Protestant brothers will recover the structure and foundation that they forfeited at the Reformation. There are some charisms, there are some spiritualities that we Catholics have so neglected that they really don't even exist in our faith anymore functionally. We will regain those. When the unity comes, everyone will rejoice. A joyful family reunion where everyone brings a dish. So, hope that answers the question. All right. Okay, we're going to go back to your chatty brother-in-law there.
Well, on the end of the storm, would that be the beginning of 1,000 years of peace?
I used to think so. I don't think so anymore. It will be the beginning of an extended period of peace, prosperity, and authentic Christian brotherhood. I've talked to some theologians. I actually spent a lot of time over the last few weeks talking with Mark Mallett about it, going through some things where each of us has refined some of our thinking. I kind of think that this is about Revelations 12. You know, the woman cloaked with the sun, the woman groaning in birth, trying to give birth to her children, and the Satan trying to destroy them, where Michael comes and puts Satan to rout. He has to go underground. There is going to be an extended period of peace, prosperity, and brotherhood, which will last longer than I do on this earth, and I have good reason to believe that it'll last at least 3 generations, though I don't know exactly how long it will last. But I don't think this is 1,000 years. I think actually this is the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. Jesus comes later. The next time, I'm told that the next time there's a mass apostasy, that it will be truly the end, and we'll go into those sequences, and then Jesus will come again. When Jesus comes again, that is the end. So I don't think that, but it could be. You know, my main thing, you've got to understand, and I want to make clear, I try to stay focused. I learn a few ancillary things, but since I've been a little kid, my job is to defend the faith, hearten the faithful, defend the faithful, get them safely to the other shore of this. After this is done, when the rescue comes, I mean, there'll be some mop-ups, but, you know, by mid-2018, I'm done. I mean, I'll raise support for the shrine, but everything else, I'm done. You know, if it turns out that I've been nutty as a pet coon through it all, I'm done. I'm going fishing, spending time with the grandkids. I don't care what anybody says. If it turns out that I have served honorably and helped people to get to that other shore, I'm done. You know, so I'm pretty glad of it. Yes, yeah, Sharon.
Can you talk about the Muslims? What's going to happen with the Muslim crowd?
Sure. Our Lady of Tepeyac. Islam is itself. First of all, understand that Muslims, all people reach out to God in the way they've been taught. It's instinctive in us. We want to reach out to our Creator. Most Muslims are good people reaching out to God in the way that they have been taught. The great tragedy is that Islam itself is a heresy, a satanic deception. It's disordered at its very nature. There are some things that are proper, that are sound. For example, to give you an example of how it is, if you are if you've got an unmarried man and an unmarried woman that are sleeping with each other, that is disordered. But going through the church, you can sanctify it through marriage and repentance on that. If you've got a man and a man sleeping with each other, it's kind of tragic if that's what they're brought to, because no matter what happens, it's disordered, but it can't be sanctified because it's disordered at its root. Islam itself is disordered at its root. And I'm going to write a longer piece about that sometimes. I'll confess I've kind of avoided some of it, although now I get called an anti-Islamic crank. The people that are cutting off heads. Here's the thing. It's disordered of its very nature. It pleases Our Lady of Tepeyac, commonly called Guadalupe. The missionaries, the Christian missionaries, how well intended they were, they had utterly failed. They had not converted the Indians in Mexico and South America. They had not ended the cult, the bloody cult of Quetzalcoatl. So Our Lady of Tepeyac came to St. Juan Diego, and she did it herself. Within a decade, the cult of Quetzalcoatl was dead. She converted them all. She converted the Indians. She comes again, and she is going to convert the Muslims, primarily through the Muslim women. But she will not do it until we in the West confront Islam and do our job. We decided we're a bunch of wusses and let everybody else do our dirty work for us. We have to stand. Once we stand, take it seriously, confront it, and fight it. The shot will be that Islam will fall quicker and easier than anyone, except me, could imagine. But I got inside information on that. We'll be patting ourselves on the back on that, because that's after the collapse, after the crash and everything. We'll be patting ourselves on the backs on, boy, we did it. Well, we didn't do much of anything. And then the real fight the real danger will rise. And the real danger has always come primarily from China. China intends to be the hegemon. It's been working for decades to be the most powerful nation on earth. It's not planning to invade a lot of countries. It just wants every country to bow down and do its bidding. China is a sort of corporate antichrist. And let me say, while people in the image of an antichrist, like John spoke of, are around, the final antichrist has not come before the end. And that's not now. You know, the subordinate antichrist can be defeated by the mystical body of Christ when they answer the call. The final Antichrist can only be defeated by Christ himself, and that is the apocalypse. That's not now. China is a sort of corporate Antichrist for these times. It's completely anti-human. It's completely anti-faith. It wants to take over the world, east and west. Russia and America will be the primary, the most steadfast allies, not to defeat China, though we'll try to, but just to endure, because they're already far more powerful. In fact, the stuff I was writing well over a decade ago about China got a few people in national security interested. I remember one guy, I had my priests that wouldn't disclose my identity then. I remember one guy high in the Defense Department about 12 years ago went white. I had written an assessment and where the world was going and what different countries were doing. One of my priests had told me his face went white, and he said, "This guy can go to prison. He's so badly messed up his security clearance here." Said his face went even whiter when my priest told him he doesn't have a security clearance. But that's the thing that is key. China is the real battle on things. But Islam will fall. And we'll have, the great thing about when Islam falls, already you're having Muslims seeing Jesus and Our Lady. That's an amazing thing there. We'll have new allies against the battle against China. And understand, I want to make this clear too, there's a difference between systems and the people who populate it. The people who are most brutalized by the Chinese system are the Chinese people. Christianity is the fastest growing religion in China. You may not know that, but it is the fastest growing religion in China. It's become a real problem for the Chinese government, and they are relentlessly and ruthlessly cracking down on Christians there. Never mistake an errant system. Boy, I sure wouldn't want to be judged by the way the American system is behaving today. But the Chinese people, God bless them. We're all going to live solidarity so that we could all live true Christian brotherhood again. I'm working on trying to give short answers. I still haven't got the hang of it. Yes, sir?
Do we arm ourselves?
Do we arm ourselves? Good question. You do what you're called to do. I'm gonna address that. Okay, I'm gonna address that. I don't know where people got the idea that Jesus is the relentless pacifist. That's only risen in about the last 200 years. I got to tell you a little story about that in a minute. The fact is, you look at, Jesus came to be a victim for us. That was part of his mission, and he lived that mission fully. But when it was his Father's honor that was at stake, he didn't nicely tell the money changers, "Hey, would you move over there?" He got out the whips and cords, and he started acting like Charles Bronson or Clint Eastwood out there, kicking things over, slapping people around. And even more important than that, you go to the 22nd chapter of St. Luke, and Jesus tells his disciples that he'll be leaving soon. He won't be with them much anymore, and that when he's gone, they're going to need a sword. And if they don't have one, they should sell their cloak and get one, because they're going to need it when he's gone. Now, unless you think that Jesus is stupid and didn't know what a sword is for, that's not the relentless pacifist there. In fact, here's what you do. If you have, I tell people, when you've got your little community, if you don't have very much, if somebody comes up and asks you for help, humbly, you trust God and you give them the help. If they want to become part of their community, then they have to do their part. There's no layabouts here. I don't care what it is. Maybe you can just read to the kids, but everybody contributes what they can, what little they can, unless they truly can't contribute anything. But I don't care if you have as much gold as Fort Knox in there. If somebody comes and tries to take it by force, or tries to attack people in your community, attack your neighbor, You don't just have the right to defend them, you have an obligation to defend them. So what I say is this. If you don't know which end of the gun is which, for heaven's sakes, please don't arm yourself. If you do, my son's a cop. My youngest brother's a cop. I got lots of people. I don't have a gun and I won't have a gun. But people who are called to it, people who know what they're doing, it's your Christian duty to defend the innocent and to defend your neighbors. So yes, if you know what you're doing, you go right ahead. I had a priest at a shrine that was a friend of mine right after 9/11. Right after 9/11, he went through the mamby-pamby. He says, yeah, we can't do anything in his homily in a daily mass. We can't do anything. We're Christians. We have to turn the other cheek. We just have to take it. And he was a good guy. It's funny how this works sometimes. After it was over, I'm like, and I'm going to use a phony name for him. I'm going to say, okay. After it was done, he's coming out, and I said, Father Ernie, we need to talk. And he looked at me and says, oh, do you need to go to confession? I said, no, we need to talk. Okay. So we went in there, and I said, where did you get the idea that Jesus is the relentless pacifist? He said, well, that's what, we're Christians. That what? And I told him the same things that I did you. And I showed him Luke 22. And he looked at me after I'd shown him, and he was overjoyed. He said, oh, thank God. I don't have to teach that balderdash anymore. So, we need to see the Bible with fresh eyes, see your faith with fresh eyes, but always follow the faith. Follow the catechism. Follow the church. But yeah, if you know what you're doing with a gun, protect your neighbors. And if you don't, you're better off that I don't have a gun. Anyone else? Well, I'm going to tell you one more story involving a gun. My son's a cop. And see, my son is my best friend. My son's a cop down in southern Georgia, near Tallahassee, Florida. Well, one night, I'm visiting with him. I'm staying for several weeks and all that. One night, he's at an apartment, and I step out looking. It's night. There's 3 guys next door trying to force a gal into a car. I'm like, So I go and I call. Of course, as a cop, he's got lots of guns in his house and all that. I go back and I get one of the pistols. I call the police department. And I tell the dispatcher, and of course I'm kind of excited to tell the dispatcher to send somebody out right away. And she says, well, where are you at? I said, call Officer Johnston. I'm at his apartment. Well, she just went through 5 minutes. I went and stood out, just holding the gun down at my side, and the guys left. But I'm trying to get this dispatcher. I said, I'm his father. It's happening at his house and all that. They're trying to kidnap a girl. Get him over. And I'm standing out there with the gun at my side, but talking loud so they hear what I'm doing, and they took off. Finally, he comes. The dispatcher finally figures it out. And I tell my son, as I'm telling him what's going on, I said, man, that dispatcher is an idiot. This girl could have been taken. We could have had people shot and everything. And he says, no, Dad, you're the idiot. I said, no, I'm not. And I started to explain again. He said, Dad, you're an idiot. I said, it's the dispatcher. Why? He said, Dad, you have my cell phone. And I looked at him and I said, I'm an idiot. Point taken. But thank goodness the gal was safe and everything. And after that, I did remember, if anything happens when I'm there, call a cell. Yes.
Charlie, what's the role of our Pope in the storm?
Our Pope Francis, he is the man chosen from all eternity to lead the church through the storm. Now, God is setting things right. He's bringing all things to light. Some of you may disagree with the Pope on scientific matters, on economic matters, and on political matters. I know I do. But that's not where the Pope has authority on. He was chosen by God from all eternity to lead us through the storm. And one of the things that I want you to know, on faith and morals. When he speaks on faith and morals, he has been completely in line with the 2,000-year tradition of this church. And beyond that, there is a movement growing of supposedly faithful Catholics that are calling Francis an anti-pope, that are trying to overthrow him. It disgusts me. It scares me. They're trying to create a schism. That's not an attack on Francis. That's an attack on Jesus Christ himself. Because Jesus said that he founded this church on Peter. Where Peter is, there the church is. Now, if you want to disagree with our Holy Father on stuff that he's not authoritative on it, have at it. We all have families. My dad and I disagree on many things, but he's my pops. Francis is my papa. He was chosen by God to lead this church through its storm, and I'll follow him. Outside the ship, the bark of Peter, there's only death and destruction. Don't let anybody beguile you away from the church. That's what I have to say on that. And I'm pretty, as you can tell, I'm pretty adamant about it. Yes? Gosh, will our priests be threatened? They're being beheaded in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Asia. Some of them have gotten jailed or fined in Canada and Great Britain, supposedly outposts of the West. Of course. But the good news is, the guys that would like to create this problem, they don't have time. I want to give you a couple of examples, and I know, okay, this was the last, and then I'm going to shake hands. The powers that be would like to oppress Christians. They might have all sorts of nefarious plans. They don't have time. Even as their egos have inflated, their power has already deflated. I'll give you a couple of examples. First of all, 20 or 30 years ago, if the federal government had declared martial law in the face of a national emergency, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican president who did it, most people would have gone along with it, figuring that whether he's right or wrong, the president is trying to look for our good. You know. Now, if a president declared martial law, all that would happen would be resistance would rise all across the country, probably outright revolt immediately. To give you an example, people have had enough of the "we know better than you" crowd. They're not taking it anymore. Texas, there was a marching band, high school marching band, playing "How Great Thou Art." A smarmy judge told them, and it was a marching band, it's just an instrumental, you got no singing. Federal judge, or a smarmy judge told them, that's illegal, you can't do it. We'll fine the school. So when halftime came, the first game of the season this year, the marching band stayed in the stands. Somebody got up and said, "Oh Lord my God." Everybody in the stand stood up and they sang "How Great Thou Art." Nobody was taking it. Yeah, baby. In southern Georgia, there was a high school there that they had a habit of doing a non-denominational prayer before their football games. Another smarmy judge told them, you can't do that. You know, you're going to be fined if you do, no more. So at their first game of the season, and everyone since, in the stands, somebody got up and said, "Our Father." Everybody got up. And every game since, the folks in the stands get up. The people, you know, we've had the "we know better than you" crowd telling us for so long that you're a bunch of rubes if you believe in faith, family, and freedom. And the people who believe in faith, family, and freedom are saying, you guys are the rubes. We've had enough. We've taken all we're going to take, and we're not taking it anymore. So I wouldn't worry about that. Be good to your priests. You know, stand behind your priests, support them, help them on things, and don't just go to them with all your troubles. invite, have them over for dinner. Go, treat them like people, treat them like brothers. So that's all. One of the things I recommend, you want to give the priests, and I recommend it on my website. I try to do it. You can't do everything, and I don't encourage you to try to do everything. But what I encourage people to do, keep an eye out. When you see a bishop or a priest, whether you know him or not, that's done something good, has taken a stand, or done something very simple, once a week, choose somebody and write him a handwritten note thanking him. If you write a handwritten note and a card, everything is so impersonal now. It all goes throwaway. You get a handwritten note, you open it, you pay attention to it. It's a memorable thing. Send it to them. They need to know that there's people out there that have their backs, and it puts so much steel in their spine and a spring in their step. So I'm going to ask, I know it's time to, as I know Carol Burnett used to sing a little song, I don't know her song, but what I do want to do, I'm going to do two prayers. First of all, I'm out of cards, I'm waiting to get them back, the prayer of miraculous trust. I want to say a prayer for you on that prayer of miraculous trust that I was given. I acknowledge Our Lady of Tepeyac, so since you don't have this, you can't follow along with me, but I'm going to do it anyway on behalf of the folks of Carol. By the power of our Lord Jesus Christ, to the honor of Our Lady, the Immaculate Conception, in service to her Immaculate Heart, I ask you, Lord, to bless all the good people who are here, all the good people in Carroll County. Make them a sign of hope. Lead them to take the next right step, to be a sign of hope to their neighbors. Heal all of their physical and spiritual ills that they may be, a sure sign of hope. And I ask you to send your servant, St. Anne, to walk with them, to guide them, and to help bring them through. I thank you for hearing my prayer. Thy will be done. Amen. So I keep it simple. And now, something that I ask every church, every priest, and every assembly that you have in these times. I like to close with the St. Michael prayer, because these are the times for it. So this will be it. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Thank you. I'll be out back there. I'd like to shake your hand. Anybody that wants to get any pictures, let's do it.